Hello, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Thursday, the 9th of June. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 106 of the illegal Russian war of aggression, and then I will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Pro-Russian officials have sentenced to death two British men and a Moroccan national captured while fighting in the Ukrainian army in Mariupol, Russian state media has said. A court in Russian-controlled East Ukraine convicted Aden Aslin, Sean Pinner, and Saudun Brahim after a days-long process that observers have called a show trial on trumped-up charges meant to imitate war crimes trials against Russian soldiers held in Kyiv. A Ukrainian commander has said that the battle in the key eastern frontline city of Severodonetsk is being fought house to house. Petro Kuzik, commander of the Svoboda National Guard Battalion, said street fighting in the city in eastern Ukraine was taking place under heavy Russian artillery barrages that endangered troops on both sides. Serhiy Haidai, the Ukrainian governor of Luhansk, said if the West could supply long-range weapons, Ukrainian forces would be able to clean up Severodonetsk in 2 or 3 days. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has claimed that its forces have won back some of the territory from Russian forces in a counter-offensive in the Kherson area of southern Ukraine. It said Russian forces had suffered losses in manpower and equipment, mined territory as they were pushed back, and erected barricades for the Ukrainian troops. The Kremlin said no agreement has been reached with Turkey on exporting Ukrainian grain shipments across the Black Sea. Turkey has been pushing for an agreement between Russia and Ukraine to ease the global food crisis by negotiating safe passage for grain stuck in Black Sea ports, but its efforts have been met with resistance. Ukraine says Russia is imposing unreasonable conditions, and the Kremlin says shipment is dependent on ending sanctions. Nearly 5 million Ukrainians have been registered across Europe since the beginning of the war, according to figures by the UN's Refugee Agency. Far more have actually left the country, with UNHCR data showing that more than 7.3 million border crossings out of Ukraine had been recorded by the 7th of June. Another 2.3 million crossings had been registered back into the country. The war in Ukraine has caused one of the largest human displacement crises in the world, the UNHCR said. A Russian-backed official in Ukraine's partially occupied southeastern region of Zaporizhia said Russia had begun to send grain from occupied areas to Turkey and the Middle East through Crimea. A Russian official in Crimea, Oleg Khrushchev, said the first train carrying grain had arrived from Melitopol, a city in Zaporizhia. The Kremlin also claimed shipments of grain will restart in the coming days from the Russian-occupied Ukrainian port of Berdyansk after work to demine the area. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is threatening to unleash an unprecedented wave of hunger and destitution, leaving social and economic chaos in its wake. A new report by the UN said an estimated 94 countries, home to about 1.6 billion people, are severely exposed to at least one dimension of the crisis and are unable to cope with it. And more than 1,000 Ukrainian servicemen and foreign mercenaries who had surrendered in Mariupol have been transferred to Russia for an investigation there, Russian state-owned news agency TASS reports. Pro-Russia officials have sentenced to death two British men and a Moroccan national captured while fighting in the Ukrainian army in Mariupol. A court in the Russian-controlled East Ukraine convicted Aden Aslin and Sean Pinner after a days-long process that observers have called a disgusting Soviet-era show trial meant to imitate the war crimes trials against Russian soldiers held in Kyiv. Aslin, 28, from Newark, and Pinner, 48, from Watford, were convicted by the court in Russian-controlled territory in Donetsk, alongside Saudun Brahim, on charges of terrorism. Both Britons have said they were serving in the Ukrainian Marines, making them active duty soldiers who should be protected by the Geneva Conventions on Prisoners of War. However, Russian state media has portrayed them as mercenaries, and the court has convicted them on the charge of being a mercenary. The ruling was swiftly condemned by top British officials. I utterly condemn the sentencing of Aidan Aslan and Sean Pinner held by Russian proxies in East Ukraine, said the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. They are prisoners of war. This is a sham judgment with absolutely no legitimacy. My thoughts are with the families. We continue to do everything we can to support them. On Wednesday, the Russian state-run news agency RIA Novosti shared footage of the men pleading guilty to the charges against them, which also included terrorism, committing a crime as part of a criminal group, and forcible seizure of power or forcible retention of power. The pro-Russian officials claimed the men's actions had led to the deaths and injury of civilians, as well as damage to civilian and social infrastructure. A pro-Russian official in Donetsk said that while the men had pleaded guilty, they were given the death penalty because of the main unshakable principle, justice. The process was closed, and only small fragments of the proceedings were made public through pro-Kremlin media. An official said that the men would have 1 month to appeal against their sentence, and if their appeal was accepted, they could receive a life or 25-year prison sentence instead of the death penalty. Russia is believed to be using the process in part to put pressure on the UK and may seek a prisoner exchange for Russian soldiers convicted of murder and other war crimes during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There is a moratorium on the death penalty in Russia, but not in the territory it occupies in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine has given 3 Russian soldiers prison sentences for war crimes tied to the Russian offensive that began on the 24th of February. Vadim Shishimarin, 21, was sentenced to life in prison on 23rd of May for killing a 62-year-old civilian in Ukraine's northeast Sumy region early in the war. On the 31st of May, Alexander Bobetkin and Alexander Ivanov were each sentenced to more than 11 years in prison for shelling attacks on population centres that violated the laws and customs of war. In a statement earlier this week, Aslan's family said he had served in the Ukrainian Marines for nearly 4 years and is not, contrary to the Kremlin's propaganda, a volunteer, a mercenary, or a spy. The family also accused Russia of violating the Geneva Conventions by releasing video of Aslan speaking under duress and having clearly suffered physical injury. ScotRail has welcomed progress following talks with ASLEF on an improved pay offer in the train drivers' dispute. In a statement following talks with ASLEF, ScotRail said its offer recognises the cost of living challenges faced by families and delivers good value for the public. ASLEF said it would recommend putting the offer to a referendum of its members and recommend acceptance of the offer itself. ScotRail's latest pay offer includes an increase in basic pay. This is broken down as 2.2% increase to recognise the cost of living challenges funded by Transport Scotland, and a further 2.8% increase to be funded by ScotRail, which recognises and rewards the flexibility of rostering arrangements as ScotRail responds to changes in their markets as we all emerge from the pandemic. There is also an excess revenue share premium, which will reward all colleagues where ScotRail exceeds revenue budget targets. This scheme will be backdated to the 1st of April 2022. Backdating it to the 1st of April means that staff would already have earned 2 periods of revenue share, as ScotRail has exceeded targets for those periods. This is £390, less tax and national insurance contributions, and if this is paid out in full, it would be worth an additional £2,535 for every member of staff. There is also a 5-year commitment to a no compulsory redundancy agreement, a commitment to bring Sundays into the working week within a 5-year period, with full implementation by the 2027 December timetable. This would require review of the terms and conditions with the trade unions, and a joint working party will be formed to enable all ScotRail staff to feed in their views, and at the end staff will have a say on the next steps. There is an improvement in maternity and adoption leave payments comprising of 13 weeks standard pay, then 13 weeks at 50% standard pay, then 13 weeks at statutory maternity pay. Sunday working allowance is to be increased by 10%. There is to be an increase in rest day working payments to £400, with the agreement extended to March 2023 to support the driver training programme. And there's an uplift of £500 per year to the driver instructor allowance. Under this offer, the basic pay for drivers, excluding trainees and those who are newly qualified, would increase by more than £2,600, taking the salary to £55,264. A similar offer on pay has also been made to the RMT, who are representing general grades. UK-EU relations will probably get worse over the next 2 years because the narcissistic politics of self-preservation will continue to prevail in the UK, and that's according to a former UK envoy to Brussels. Sir Ivan Rogers, who served as the UK's ambassador to the EU until he quit in 2017 over Brexit, forecast that the Northern Ireland Protocol dispute would remain a crucial impediment to any improvement in the UK-EU relationship for the rest of the UK Parliamentary and European Commission terms, which are both due to end in 2024. In a speech prepared for the European University Institute in Florence, Rogers describes the UK government as dishonest and dismal. He also takes aims at ministers and former Brexit negotiators, who he claims are increasingly arguing that their project risks failing because true Brexit has not been properly tried, in an uncanny echo of the language of revolutionary ultra-leftists during the Cold War in relation to the Soviet Union. Badly weakened by the confidence vote, Boris Johnson is expected to table legislation next week that would override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, an integral part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement the Prime Minister signed with the EU less than 3 years ago. The EU has warned this could create an economically damaging trade war and is expected to retaliate with tariffs on UK goods. In the wide-ranging speech to be given today, Rogers says, with Northern Ireland as the dominant issue, relations will probably continue to deteriorate rather than improve in the next 2 years. To tell the dismal truth, this might actually suit both parties, at least in terms of short-term political positioning, even if it results in a trade war none of us needs or can really afford. The former ambassador urges both sides to find common ground in the face of a brutal war in Europe, rising authoritarian powers, and persistent inflation. The alternative, he said, was to live for years with a frozen conflict between the EU and the UK, with only isolated pockets of cooperation. He also expects Johnson to battle on, trying harder to appease the forces on the right wing of the Conservative Party, who are likeliest to have another go at decapitating him. Rogers was the UK's ambassador to the EU from 2013 to 2017. After a series of top jobs at the Treasury and Downing Street, he negotiated David Cameron's EU special status deal in 2016. But he quit when politicians and officials who disliked his warnings about the complexity of Brexit began briefing against him. The extension to the census collection period saw an additional 200,000 households complete their census, it was announced today. Setting out progress to Parliament, the Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Angus Robertson MSP, announced that the national return rate increased by 8.7 percentage points since the start of the extension to 87.9%, bringing the total number of households providing a response to Scotland's Census 2022 to almost 2.3 million. The level of national census returns provides a strong position to build up a picture of the population as National Records of Scotland moves to the next phase of the census. Mr. Robertson said, "The census is a once-in-a-decade exercise and plays an important role in decision-making for Scotland. I want to thank everyone who completed the census. Your responses will help shape the future of vital public services across Scotland." I also want to give my thanks to all of the people involved over the past few months, from the hundreds of field staff, contact centre agents, and census officials who were instrumental in ensuring the voices of households across Scotland were heard. We extended the collection period, he continued, to ensure that as many people as possible could have the opportunity to complete it. Since the start of the extension, we have seen significant progress, with 10 local authorities achieving a return rate of more than 90%, and 28 local authorities having a return rate of more than 85%. This data will provide us with a strong position as we move to the next phase and turn this data into actions that will benefit people across Scotland. Power companies must up their game after thousands of households in the UK faced appalling conditions when they were left without power for more than a week after Storm Arwen hit last year, the industry watchdog has said. Publishing its full report into the response of power distributors to the storm, Ofgem said they were underprepared and provided an unacceptable service to customers, with nearly 1 million homes losing power and 4,000 of those cut off for longer than a week. Jonathan Brearley, the chief executive of the regulator, said companies must do more to make sure they were prepared for the winter ahead. The main message to all the network companies is, up your game, get ready for winter. This is a really tough time for customers right now. This is a market where everybody is having a difficult time. Every energy company that's working in this country needs to be working on behalf of their customers, and that means big changes for the networks, he said. 3 network operators, Northern Powergrid, Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, and Electricity North West, have paid nearly £30 million in compensation to affected customers, and have agreed to pay a further £10.3 million in redress payments. Ofgem said a total of £44 million would have been paid by distribution network companies as a result of failures in their response to Storm Arwen. These included poor communications with customers. Brearley said that while the regulator recognised companies had faced challenging conditions in the aftermath of the storm, which was the worst the country had faced in a decade, it was unacceptable that nearly 4,000 homes in parts of England and Scotland were off power for over a week, often without accurate information as to when power would be restored. Ofgem has issued a raft of recommendations, which include stress testing the capacity of customer call centres and forcing power network and distributing firms to submit winter preparedness plans that prove they can properly support customers during power disruptions. David Smith, the chief executive of the Energy Networks Association industry body, said he welcomed Ofgem's findings, adding that members had pledged to increase spending on resilience measures such as tree cutting and flood prevention by 20%, from £12 billion to £14.5 billion over the next 5 years. Those plans have been submitted to Ofgem for their approval. Asylum seekers due to be flown to Rwanda under the Home Secretary's offshoring plan could be released and tagged if a legal challenge causes their flight to be postponed. Home Office staff are aware that they cannot detain people indefinitely if they are not sent to the East African country on the first planned flight. An emergency High Court hearing that challenges Priti Patel's policy is to be held at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. It will determine whether the first flight can go ahead on Tuesday as scheduled. Government sources confirmed there was a healthy chance that Friday's challenge would be successful, causing the chartered flight to be postponed. If that happens, officials are understood to be prepared to release and tag those currently detained. Decisions would be made after taking into consideration the Hardy-L-Singh principles, which reference a legal precedent that sets limits on the Home Office's immigration detention powers. Friday's hearing comes after a judicial review was launched on Wednesday by the Public and Commercial Services Union, the charity Care for Calais, and the pressure group Detention Action, along with 4 asylum seekers facing removal to Rwanda. The case will challenge aspects of the policy, which was unveiled by Boris Johnson including Patel's right to carry out such removals, the rationality of Patel's claim that Rwanda is generally a safe third country, the adequacy of provision for malaria prevention in Rwanda, and whether it complies with the Human Rights Act. Also, officials are refusing to rule out sending Afghans to Rwanda on Tuesday, despite the deteriorating political situation in their home country. The only nationality of people who will not be considered for new policy are Rwandans themselves. Meanwhile, the artists Tracy Emin and Anthony Gormley, the football presenter Gary Lineker, the musician Akela, and the Cure frontman Robert Smith are among more than 70 public figures who have written to airlines chartered by the Home Office for deportation flights and have urged them not to get involved with transporting asylum seekers to Rwanda. The airlines targeted are Titan Airways, Privilege Style, and Iberojet. In a campaign by the charity Freedom from Torture, 15,000 letters of protest have been sent by members of the public to airlines believed to be involved in the Rwanda scheme. Pressure is mounting on the US Senate to act on gun safety in the wake of the Uvalde and Buffalo massacres, as Republican intransigence continues to stand in the way of all but modest reforms. On Wednesday, the House of Representatives passed a package of gun safety measures designed to staunch the disaster of mass shootings. The extent of Republican resistance was underlined by the fact that only 5 out of 208 House Republicans voted for the legislation. Now the focus, and with it the anger of victims' families and gun safety advocates, turns to the Senate. With the chamber divided 50-50 and 60 votes needed to overcome the filibuster, there is no chance of Democrats passing any changes unless they can bring Republican leaders with them. As compromise talks continue, there are tentative hopes that a deal might be in the offing, but the outcome is likely to be dictated by Republican refusal to contemplate anything other than really limited steps. The most promising proposals under discussion include plans to increase resources for mental health treatment, school safety provisions, and money to encourage states to introduce red flag laws that remove guns from those who might harm themselves or others. A group of more than 220 chief executives from some of the biggest brands in the US sent a joint letter to the Senate today in which they lamented what they called the public health crisis of gun violence. We urge the Senate to take immediate action, transcend partisanship, and work together to pass bold legislation to address gun violence in our country, the letter said. Among the signatories were business leaders of some of the most familiar corporations, including Levi Strauss & Company, Lyft, Unilever US, Yelp, and the Philadelphia Eagles. Chip Bergh, the chief executive of Levi Strauss, said in a statement that it was time for senators to act. Inaction on federal legislation has made gun violence a uniquely American problem, he said. Gun safety groups are also piling pressure on the Senate. Chris Brown, the president of the Brady campaign, pointed out that the Senate has sat on legislation to tighten federal background checks on gun sales for the past 15 months. A ban on AR-15 style rifles, the sort used in both Uvalde, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed, and in Buffalo, New York, where 10 black people were killed at a grocery store, is not on the agenda for the Senate compromise talks. The discussions, which are being led by the Democratic Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, and his Republican counterpart, John Cornyn from Texas, are focusing on more granular measures that have greater hope of moving forward. Other ideas on the table are a proposal to introduce juvenile records into federal background checks for anyone under 21 trying to buy a firearm. Senate Republicans will not countenance raising the age limit to buy AR-15s to 21, even though both the Uvalde and alleged Buffalo shooters were aged 18. Mass shootings continue to be an epidemic in the US, occurring far more frequently than high-profile disasters such as Uvalde and Buffalo. The Gun Violence Archive, which tracks mass shootings, defined as events in which 4 or more people are shot or killed, has counted 251 such incidents in the US so far this year. New legislation which proposes changes to the way imprisonment is used in Scotland, while placing victims at its heart, has been published. The Bail and Release from Custody Scotland Bill will refocus the way remand is used, with an emphasis on remand being reserved for those who pose a risk to public safety, or those who willfully fail to turn up for their trials, meaning justice will not be delivered for victims. The bill also aims to give a greater focus to the rehabilitation and reintegration of people leaving prison, to help them resettle in their communities. These changes are designed to lead to greater public protection and victim safety, and are intended to reduce crime, reoffending, and victimisation. Proposals include the publication of new national standards for support for people leaving prison, ending release on a Friday or the day before a public holiday so people are better able to access support, and a new test that the courts will need to apply when deciding whether to refuse bail and to remand accused persons in custody. The bill will also enable the provision of information about prisoner release to victims' organisations to inform the support they provide, and will explicitly recognise complainer safety as a specific factor in how the court makes decisions on bail. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Veterans, Keith Brown MSP, said there will be a continued focus on cutting crime and reoffending, creating fewer victims, with reconviction rates already at one of the lowest comparable levels since records began, and recorded crime is lower than in the early 1970s. An electoral reform bill allowing nationals from countries where a relevant treaty has been agreed, including Luxembourg, Poland, Portugal, and Spain, to become local councillors has been passed by our Parliament. All resident nationals from these countries will be able to stand for election as a councillor in Scotland, even if they only have limited leave to remain, and even if that leave is set to expire during their term of office, under the bill. This follows changes made in 2020, which ensured all resident nationals from EU countries can vote in local elections, and that those with settled status or pre-settled status can stand as candidates in local government elections. This bill will grant candidacy rights in Scottish local government elections to people from Luxembourg, Poland, Portugal, and Spain living in Scotland who do not have settled status or pre-settled status in accordance with the treaties covering local election participation. The bill also allows Scottish ministers to add to the list of countries through regulations if further treaties are signed. The Minister for Parliamentary Business, George Adam MSP, said this bill makes a small but important change to the law to ensure all nationals of Luxembourg, Poland, Portugal, and Spain can stand as candidates in Scottish local government elections. And the University of St Andrews is leading on a transformative new programme endorsed by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, UNESCO, to address the effects of climate change on the ocean. As part of the UN's Ocean Decade, and in celebration of World Oceans Day, UNESCO announced the endorsement of 63 actions, projects and programmes that address pollution and the management and restoration of marine ecosystems. The university's Global Ocean Decade programme for blue carbon is one of 4 major programmes unveiled, and will focus on the role of blue carbon ecosystems across estuarine, coastal and open ocean environments for better ocean sustainability. It is a partnership with the UK's Government's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, the Scottish Government, the Blue Carbon Initiative Conservation International, the International Partnership for Blue Carbon, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. Blue carbon refers to carbon stored in marine habitats, such as salt marshes. These marine ecosystems are highly effective at capturing CO2 and storing carbon in organic rich soils, often over thousands of years. The degradation or damage of these ecosystems may cause carbon to be released from the soil stores back into the atmosphere, at the same time compromising their ability to capture and store carbon in the future. Professor William Austin from the University's Scottish Oceans Institute and School of Geography and Sustainable Development said, "The United Nations Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development reflects the global ambition for collective action on the ocean. It will build a global partnership to support the ocean science that we need to inform these actions." The programme aims to identify and provide evidence-based actions for blue carbon as nature-based solutions that go beyond climate mitigation, highlighting benefits for biodiversity and society, as well as climate adaptation and resilience. And that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. If you are able to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You may have seen our appeals for financial assistance on Facebook and Twitter because the pressing and urgent need for immediate financial support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work if you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can also find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. Meantime, Hugh will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join him then. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 7:32. Thank you to everyone who has been watching this evening. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening and can join us again soon here on Broadcasting Scotland. Bye-bye.